Sorry I didn't give too many people heads up. Let's see if we can do this. I got a 200T over there sitting in a box, and nobody's here, so we're going to wait a little bit and see if anybody shows up. So let's put this down, hopefully in the right spot. And there we go. Down a little bit further. There. Okay, so now I've got my other phone so I can watch myself. Hey, somebody's on. Who's here? Anybody here? Who's here? I've got my little battery-powered thing so I can monitor all of the questions and whatnot. How's the signal? Is the signal okay? Can everybody see me? Holy cow, I have 5 watching now. Check that out. Alright, so now I can see myself and monitor any comments anybody has. Turn my volume down a little bit so I don't have so much feedback. Do a little bit of cleanup here in anticipation of doing a little bit of work. So I'm going to work on a 200T. Anybody have any questions? I never finished my my comments on the differences between 394s and 395s. Of huge interest, guys. I have these helicoil taps. So yeah, before I get started, let's go over one interesting thing that I just figured out. So I've got this helicoil set, and they're not they're not too bad for money. They're pretty cheap, but I keep breaking taps. What happens is I use these in my drill, and then the drill falls over and you bust a tap. So it's like, geez, I'd love to buy a whole pile of taps. As we know, we can buy whole piles of taps. I'll just prove it here. So you can buy a whole pile of taps on eBay, you know, in these parts lots or whatever. And these are actually M5. I think there's a few M6s in here. But if you think about it, you need a specific tap to put a specific helicoil in, and it has to be the same thread pitch. So if the helicoil itself is getting you an M5 thread that you can grab with a screw, that means that the outer diameter of this is going to be different, closer to M6. But it's not easy to find M6 at 0.8, so you have to buy these proprietary taps from Helicoil. And luckily I found these for like $3.99 a piece plus shipping, but on eBay. But it would be nice to buy a whole pile of them because they're the ones that I use the most often. Anyway, just wanted to mention that before I, get going. So anyway, so I bought a couple of those. Maybe here's the broken one. Now this one's more of a flat bottom tap. These are more through hole taps, and by the way, the part numbers are on here. It's 2087-5 is, and it says size M5.8, but that's for the M5 helicoil. That's not the actual size of the tap. So what I might do is I might grind on that other tap and make it more into a flat bottom tap in case I need it. But we're going to put that away for now. Cody, do I have any plans of building a 200T from Huzzle? Not specifically. Thank you to Brian and Ryan for giving me this to rebuild. They said they've got like 6 more of these to do. So I'm going to build a whole pile of these. I'm getting my echo here. Hang on a second. If I build a whole pile of these, I mean, what's the real difference between these and the Huzzle ones, or Huzzle or Huzzle or whatever it is? Is there any point to me building a Huzzle one? At least, I don't think so, because these are so readily available by guys that really need rebuilds. So I don't know. Do I have any plans specifically? No, I don't. I don't have a plan to go buy any right now. I'm basically swamped with work just doing... If this guy's going to bring me like 6 of these, then I'm definitely going to be swamped. So, you bring up an interesting point, though. The Huzzle kits are... I mean, I'm getting all nervous. I mean, this is a live stream, guys. This is cool. The Huzzle stuff actually presents a opportunity that literally the world has never seen. We've never had a kit chainsaw. Now, you can argue about the quality, plus, minus, and Walt always has a good point. This is always a moving target because you just don't know, what factory the parts are going to come from, if they're having a good day, if they're having a bad. Maybe they're putting glass fiber reinforcement in things. Maybe they're not. I mean, great example of that. So, PA66MD15. So this is an OEM 394 chain brake handle. And I found that the aftermarket ones, I think I have one here yet. I have one somewhere. I did have one lying around. Anyway, the issue with the ones from Huzzle is that they don't have nearly as much glass fiber reinforcement. They're just not as robust. So, do they work? Yeah, but you got to be gentle with them. Now, this thing, if you take the difference between an aftermarket and the OEM chain brake handles, it's basically the same thing. The OEMs are more robust. They just are. I mean, this thing's been beat to crap, and this is still intact. That's crazy to me. So some of the parts are just not as robust. Now, some of them, as far as I'm concerned, don't matter. And that's the phone. I'll be right back, guys. Hang on. Don't you love spam phone calls? Junk. Okay. So some of the parts just don't matter if they're OEM or not. There are probably plenty of parts here that are nearly irrelevant. Like, I really don't think the muffler matters if it's OEM or aftermarket. I think the mufflers are fine as aftermarket. Okay. Probably some of the rubber pieces, like the intake boot, the fuel line, that type of stuff, you probably need to have that as original, because I just don't trust the rubber from China. But every time you do that, you turn around and you try to get those original pieces, and they're really expensive. So I think an OEM rubber boot is like 30, 40 bucks. So you're either dealing with a whole, like we did with the 660s, you know, you got to change parts out and whatnot in order for the thing to be sort of reliable. So I think the Hustle kits are great for certain things, but ultimately you got to play around with them. And if you're just using them for fun, I mean, go crazy. But there's not a whole lot of difference as far as assembly goes between one kit or the other. So if I just assemble one of these, it's going to be basically the same as assembling a Hustle kit. It's just you might, with a Hustle kit, you might actually need to adjust more things as it goes together. Did that answer the question, Cody? I know, I'm being long-winded. This chain is nearly shot, huh? All right. Of course, they've got this on there with a monkey wrench. Guys. Is a 3/4 inch or 19mm nut to start. How about a metal tray, which is always useful. Yuck, but the brake band's fairly well intact. I'll bet this whole thing works fine, just needs a cleanup. Box. Now, one of the first things I did was take out the spark screen on this. Obviously, there's legality issues with that, but on the 200Ts, that's one of the mods that makes the most difference, I think. Yeah, Cody, if you're building these things for fun, go crazy. You know, I think they're a great learning tool also. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Because, really, if you screw it up, so what? You know, and especially if you have a bunch of parts available to you. Like I have a steel dealer that's right down the street, so you know, they're expensive, but they're right down the street, so I can go down and get stuff if I need it. And they usually have the 200T carburetors in stock, which are like $90 a piece. Now I got my box. Now we can get this thing really torn down. You know, I often like to actually sharpen the chain before I take it apart, just to make sure the customer has a pretty nice chain. This I may sharpen later, just for sake of time. Man, this thing's ugly. One of the issues with this is it won't reach full RPM. So you rev it, it sounds pretty good, but it won't quite get up there to full RPM. It just doesn't want to get all the way up. So, you know, this thing has never been torn down, and this goes to my philosophy and how I look at things. This thing has never been torn down, and if you have a saw that's this old, tear it down. You know, you start having issues with it, just tear it all the way down, bring it all the way back, new rubber, new seals, new bearings, all that stuff. Now, often you'll find that when they start running bad, it's because they get a super clogged filter. Now, this one does not appear to be super clogged. It looks pretty brand new. So somebody went in here and at least put a new filter in. So what do we want to do first? You want to do the sprocket here? Because I'm going to tear this all the way down. Actually, you know what? Let's do a compression test. Let's see where we're at on that. Yeah, it's pretty rich. So, compression tester goes in. Pulls. So 135. It's not tons of compression. It's not terrible. Probably could use a new piston and rings. At 130, you know, 150, 160 would be better to see. Course, you know what, let's just use some nylon rope here for a piston stop, and we'll take the clutch off. Again, I'm going to tear this down completely, so I don't have to worry about stuff getting into the cylinder, because I'm going to tear it down completely. I just went down to the depot and bought a few feet of this rope here, so don't need much, just a bit. Get it to hang, 13 millimeter on the clutch, spinning clockwise. Your clutch comes off. You can check it. Sometimes the clutch springs go bad, but unless this is got a lot of chain creep at idle, for the most part you can leave them alone. Needle bearings intact. For some dumb reason these are always a pain to get out. so let's cheat a little bit. Ah, missing a screw here. Just need a small screwdriver. Get some of the dirt out. So let's pull the plastic covers off. Chain guides can come off. And always nice to have my drill with a T27 on it. I do like these little Bosch drills. I've had them for a number of years. They're available in impact as well. Oh, you know what? Not just missing a screw, but missing a piece of baffle here. See, and those baffles are available aftermarket, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having those pieces aftermarket. The worm is not stripped. That's fine. Another piece that is good to have is OEM, because this is more glass fiber reinforcement in here than the aftermarket stuff, so it'll last longer. Let's see. Usually forget to do silly stuff like drain the oil and the gas. So let's do that. Oil is drained. There's at least some gas in there. Now the gas is drained. Probably going to be a good idea to get a new fuel line for this. Nine guys on here. Check that out. Anybody questions? I mean, I'm just, you know, getting going here, so anybody has questions. I'm going to write down stuff that I need. Fuel line and filter. Bearings. Gasket set. Carb. I almost guarantee you this is going to need a new carburetor. Back down to 8 people. People come, people go. Put the cap back on the fuel tank here. What do you want to do next? Oiler? Let's do the oiler. Two screws. Now, one thing about this oiler is it is actually on top of the spark plug wire. The spark plug wire here is a bit of a trick. So, in order to get it in, you know, all the order of things and whatnot, it's a little bit tricky. So when I go and put this together, whenever I get parts, James, yeah, the live vids do get made into normal videos, so you can you should be able to go back and forth and whatnot. Now can you do it now? I don't know. Let me know. I would think you would be able to go back now and see what I was doing 2 minutes ago, which was not much. So what I like to do is I like to not lose these screws and just put them back, because they just a little bit, so we know that they hold the oiler on. Okay. And we don't have to remove the rubber pieces. I mean, you can if you suspect you got a leak or something, you can remove them, but I don't think I need to remove them right now. Let's do the carburetor. Why not? So here, I have my 8mm thing. Where's my 8mm setup? Did put it back here. I did put it back. Check that out. Oh man, come on, guys. Oh, too much. Too much. Don't do that. You just don't need it to be that tight to hold the carburetor down. Two 8mm screws. We're missing. There's a little piece of foam that's supposed to go in here. Foam piece. I'll just put that on the list. Foam piece. And actually, I'm going to throw all these. This in the box over here. Was it the clutch shroud, or whatever you want to call it? Clutch shroud, missing a piece of that. Now, I like, in general, I don't like this setup, but it is pretty easy to maintain. You can get the carburetor out pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. Man, I wish I knew what I was doing. There's a little screw on the side here, and this takes out your summer-winter plug, or whatever the heck this is. This is designed to prevent hot air from going into the engine area, or recircling, sorry, from hot air from the engine area to go into the carburetor area, but if you're doing it in the wintertime, then you want a little bit more warm air going into the carb area. You could just switch this over, this piece. I don't do a whole lot of cutting in the winter, so it doesn't mean that much to me. The choke rod comes off, and this is an odd configuration. It does work, but it is odd. Here's your tank vent, and then let's see in here. There's the fuel line, which just gets pushed off, but it'd be easier to do with a set of hemostats. In case anybody's wondering, I picked these up at a junk store years ago. And of course, there's gasoline that shoots out everywhere, even though I have fully emptied the tank. That's pretty normal, right? And literally you just lift the carburetor out. It just comes right out. So, should we play with the carburetor first? Why not? Let's play with the carburetor just a little bit. Just want to see kind of what's going on. Maybe the carburetor's gummed up. Maybe something's frozen in there. I don't know. This is not one of those cooking shows where everything's prepared. Not a show at all. You're just watching me work in my basement, really. Larry, it's a good point. I don't have a power washer. And usually what I do is I pull stuff apart. It's dirty, and it goes right in the ultrasonic. And I don't happen to have an ultrasonic right now. Bit of a long story there. There's fuel in here, but there's also dirt in here. Let's pull apart the other side. For the most part, just get new carburetors. If you want to tear these down and play with these, I mean, be my guest, but I'll show you how to do it. But my experience so far, and I've done probably dozens of these, that it's just not worth your time to mess around with these. It's just so much easier to go buy new, and unfortunately they're expensive, but that is the cost of doing business with these darn things. And you know, I was just reading a post, I think it was on OPE, and it was Bob from Ashokan Turf and Timber, because he was kind of upset with the current offerings of top handle saws from both Husky and Steel, and it's pretty much well regarded that this is kind of your only option. So yeah, this is pretty much the only thing going out here. And actually, I wonder, somehow this limiter is messing things up. That might be possible. Anyway, again, it's just easier to take these things. I mean, if you want to clean it out, put it back on the saw and see if it works. Great. It only takes 5 minutes to change a carburetor out, but really you need to have an OEM carburetor on hand, because if you get a whole thing back together and it's just not running right, change out the carburetor. But Larry, you make a good point. You know, it would be a whole lot cleaner if I did power wash the saws. It's a good point. Thinking. I happen to have 200T carburetors here. It was just not, it was running way too rich. It just would not lean out. I'm just wondering if I change out the high needle here. That'll make a difference. So all I'm going to do here is put the original, actually I've got a new carburetor kit that is installed on one of these carburetors that doesn't work, but the carburetor kit is new. So what I might do is just throw that carb kit in here. There we go. maybe I'll throw the carburetor kit in here, because the diaphragm and these things, if they get messed up even a little bit, they don't flow right. Let's see if we can put a carb kit in here. Actually, first thing, before I put the new parts in, sometimes the needles are just fine. Sometimes the filters are just fine. Here's how we check it. A little bit of brake cleaner. Does the fuel go through? Oh yeah, fuel goes through. The metering lever was set a little bit on the low side. You want it flush with the top here. Little brake cleaner on the top, metering level down. Does fuel flow through? Oh yeah, okay. So now I'm going to put the carburetor kit from, let's see. This carburetor has a brand new kit in it, but it was boggy like crazy, just wouldn't flow fuel. So I'll take the kit out, because the kit's brand new. And try it in here. Yeah, see them? That's brandy new. Gasket on first, on top of the carburetor, then the diaphragm, then the top cover. That's the order. Questions? Great. They go flying. Okay. By hand. Take the other one apart here. That's perfectly flat. There's no bulges or indents there. So now we can just put that right on there. Again, by hand. That's it. So if that works, I mean, we'll try it later, whenever I get this whole thing back together. But if it works, great. If it doesn't, I'm getting new anyway. And Brian and Ryan, what I might do is I might just buy a carburetor for you, especially if we're gonna do 6 of these. You're definitely gonna need one. So I'll buy a brand new one for you, and I'll mark it for you, and keep it on hand. So, okay, let's get back to tearing the rest of the saw down. AV mount screws, the big ones. Nice to keep the top handle intact. You don't have to go in here and tear things apart. It does get at least a little annoying to put this stuff back together. And if you're gonna tear that apart, make sure you take photographs first. Throttle rod, the choke lever you leave in there. There's a, oh man, an internal ring for the boot. And then there's the external ring for the boot too. We've got 2 chassis screws over here. Let's get rid of those. And one of those holds the shorting wire in. And then there's a screw over here inside the handle. Now the handle wants to come off. But really the things that are holding it back now are the boot and the impulse line. Now the boot you can probably reuse. You got to check it really well. But the impulse line at this point, probably want to replace. Looks pretty good, but who knows. There's the anterior AV mount. And then we have one more wire towards the front here. It's holding things in, which I forgot about. There's the other shorting wire. It's a little black wire, and it's got a little spade connector on it. Straight back, or straight forward rather. Just lost that screw. I'll find that in a minute. So the handle's off. Yay. Lose the screw that goes in the front mount here. Just put that back for the moment. Okay, so I've kind of dealt with stuff on this side. Now I want to deal with stuff. Let's see, how's this looking? Yeah, see, this line is kind of old and crusty. And if you just touch it the wrong way, it might break on you. So four screws for the starter cover. None there. So I need to get a new screw for that. Yucky, huh? Starter cover speed screw. And look at our starter and see. It does seem to be intact pretty well. So I don't need to get parts for that. Great. Hang on, guys. Hello? More spam phone calls. James and Larry. Okay, so Larry, the reason I say work on saw is at least hit him with a garden hose. Yeah, I know. You're right. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Um, James Griffiths. On my saw needs repairing the left handle where the AV mounts on the saw is snapped off. How can I get that out? You mean this spot, James? Is this spot having your issue? You're wondering how to get the rubber AV mount off? Is that what's going? Okay, so especially if the rubber is broken, there is a piece of metal here, and it does happen to be 19 millimeters. So this is not easy. I think it's 19, yeah. But no, maybe I'm wrong. There is a piece of metal under here, and you have to grab it and turn it. Quarters of an inch. Let's see if I can do it. Here's 3/4. This one's kind of buggered. It may not let me grab it. It's 20 millimeters. Yeah, 20 millimeters. That's it. So you can turn it just like that. Does that help you? Yeah, it's not the rubber. There's a metal backing to it, and it's really thin. So you got to get your wrench on that, and it's not easy. And this AV mount is nearly shot. I think you'll get a little bit more life out of it, but I don't know. Do I put a new one on? I put a new one on. How about we put a new one on? Good thinking. See, when this is coming apart like that, that's just waiting to fail utterly. So I'll see if I have one. If I don't, then well, it goes on the list anyway. AV mount. Good. Glad I could help. Okay. Really, when you're to this point, I think it's easiest to get the tank off. So, but first we need to get the boot off. And it's a little tricky. Two screwdrivers. Do not puncture the boot. And for some reason this snagged back here on the tank, so let's just work on the tank. 2 screws for the chassis. Once the tank moves, you should be able to work this out. Yeah. So this just presses on, and that's what holds the boot on. Awful simple, if you ask me. To me, I would prefer something a little more robust, but the design does work. And the boot looks intact. It's fairly supple. No rips, tears. A pinhole in here will screw everything up, but it looks good. Piston looks okay through the intake. Ah, we're missing a screw down here. So these screws I put to the side because I'm just going to put them back on the chassis. But now the tank you should be able to remove. I mentioned actual one other thing. Sorry, flywheel. Let's do the flywheel. Keep the questions coming, guys. If you got questions, ask them. You can talk about other stuff too. Flywheel, 13 millimeters. Let's do some WD-40. Ideally, I like PB Blaster here, but I don't happen to have any right this moment. Don't know why. Take a small pry bar, lift up just by the flywheel. There it goes. A whole lot easier than that 394 the other day, huh? We have a Woodruff key. Yeah, they're usually kind of stuck in there, so for right now you don't have to worry about it, but don't lose it. Whole thing doesn't run if you don't got a Woodruff key. Down to 6 people. Am I that boring? Yeah, I know. I am. It's okay. Oh. We got a good old-fashioned kink in the impulse line. That's nice. At least it feels like it. Yikes. Okay. Where the devil did that piece come from? Oh, so in the window, right here. Okay. Why have I not seen that piece before? Spark plug area. Hang on, that's weird. Here. What was that? Oh, a piece tore off of that, but what was that doing there? A new part, I guess. That's interesting. Never seen that piece in a 200T before. It's the wear right here. Must be an AV mount of some kind. Interesting. Never seen that part before. Do have a crack here in the side of the tank. As long as this isn't leaking, you can leave it. What I might do is I might plastic weld that just a little bit. Gotta clean this though. Questions, comments, anything, guys? Any questions? No? Okay. Muffler next. I think that's easy. 2 main bolts hold the muffler on. There are washers in here. Cylinder head looks good. Piston looks good. So if the compression's down a bit, it needs new rings or a new piston. It's just worn. And this is the wrong line for impulse line, by the way. Steel R3 is not the correct line. I think R5 is the stuff you're supposed to use. This is R3. Yeah. So not the correct line. I'll save it for now to get a measurement, but back to the muffler. I've got to save the washer in here if I can. Yep. So 2 muffler bolts, 2 washers. Okay. What else? Let's take out the Woodruff key. Put this aside. Nice and easy with the Woodruff key. Now when you try to pull this apart, the Woodruff key doesn't get stuck on the seal. Ignition coil. These do have washers. Now the ignition coil comes out, and mind how the stuff is routed. The little wire is actually under the big one through this channel right here, and we can unsnap the little wire here, and then what you do is you actually unscrew the ignition coil. I don't like doing this, but you basically have to, because we're going to pull the ignition coil wire through the other side. Sort of. Wash this later. Hey Bob, yeah, what was the original saw condition? So the condition was A, it's old. B, it just wasn't getting to full RPM. And Brian and Ryan came to me and said, you know, we've tuned this a million different ways and it loses its tune, and you know, just go through it because it just doesn't have the power it should. And I'm like, okay. You know, has it ever had, you know, one of my first questions is always, has it ever had a rebuild? And they're like, probably not, you know. So if you have a saw that's like 20 years old and it's been dragged behind a truck, whether it, you know, whether it technically needs it or not, it's kind of time for a rebuild. Because what happens is, I mean, we got lucky here, but what happens is one of the seals goes or whatever, and then you lose your top end, and now you're replacing a whole new top end. Here, the cylinder head looks like it's fine. I'll bet this is going to be fine, but the piston needs to be replaced. Bearings and seals need to be replaced. Carburetor probably needs to be replaced. So, you know, by the time you're into a saw for that much, you know, you're doing a full teardown. Just do the whole thing. Does that help answer the question? I'm pretty aggressive about doing teardowns because I just don't think a lot of stuff is worth it to dink around with one little problem here or there, especially on the older saws. Um, the newer stuff, you can fiddle around, something's not working right, especially these. Again, there was a link. Bob from Ashokan Turf and Timber posted a question, and it had to do with the current offerings of top handles, and one of the problems that both Steel and Husky are having is that the saws go out of tune, something isn't right, idling issues, blah blah blah, whatever. And a lot of that has to do with the electronics, not necessarily the bearings and the seals. But by the time a saw is 20 years old, I mean, spending its entire life in a bucket, thing has been tossed around. It's kind of time to do bearing and seals, especially before you have an issue. These 200T top ends are not cheap, and if you want good compression, you're probably going to have to go with an OEM top end. Great. So these are T27. These are longer M5 bolts than normal. 25 millimeter, I forget. I think I know where I can get one of those. Well, Bob, they're all around. I mean, literally, there are guys that are using these things and they love them, and they have every right to love them, but they all need teardowns at this point. Like every single one. I would argue that with pretty much anybody. Andreas, oh gosh, still no table. No. Again, my sawmill's outside. I could put a bigger table here, but I don't. I don't know why. I should be outside building my firewood bin. I've got it mostly built. Nice and clean inside. But it's dry. Dry, dry, dry. And for a saw that's run as rich as this was, to see this dry means that there just wasn't that much oil in the gas. Let's see. A little bit of lube. But the bearings and whatnot here are dry. So it really would be nice to see a little bit more lube in the gasoline, whatever they're running. Would be, so Brian and Ryan, just so you know, whatever you're running in these, there's a real thin film here, but it would be better to run a little bit more oil in here. So if you're running 50 to 1, 40 to 1 is, probably a good start. That would be what I would recommend, just after seeing the internals here. I'd like to see them a little more wet. But, I mean, there's no damage. The cylinder head looks pretty good. Little carboned up, but not bad. Again, I'm going to clean all this stuff up later. This is also one of the situations I probably could just stick new rings in this thing. Have it be okay. Maybe it's just easier to throw a new piston on. They're not that expensive. I think I'll just throw a new piston on. But I don't need to take the piston off right this second. I can actually just separate the case halves and then take the piston off. So what say you? Should we separate the case halves? Why not? Here, let's put all these nuts and bolts down here. Ignition coil bolts, I'm going to put them back here just temporarily. Come on, get in there. And now we need to find all of our case bolts. And they're all friggin' buried. So, do the dog first here. If I remember right, there's some bolts under there, I think. So, dog first. Now, Bosch does make an impact version of this, which I would really love to have, just haven't gotten it yet. Ah. There's what's left of the chain catcher. You think it's kind of time to have a new chain catcher? Uh-huh. Make sure I can get to all these. And these saws get more gunked up. All right. So there's essentially 3 directly around in a triangle around the crankcase. 1, 2, and then the third one, actually I think this is under, is it under this thing? Under the oiler. That rubber adapter piece for the oiler. 3. 4. 5. I think there's 8. We already took out 2. 6. Okay. So now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8 on the top here. Doesn't matter. Okay. Think we can pop her apart? That's right, Andy. Don't need no stinking tables. Now I just need a millet. Hit it with the millet. Here we go. But they don't always come apart quite so easy. Okay. And the millet won't do. Get the screwdriver in. There we go. Ka-pop, ka-pop. Now, you don't want to damage the case. You don't ever want to stick a screwdriver between where the case joins up. There you have it. And literally, this just slides apart. There's no press fit here. These roller bearings are not press fit. They just slide fit. I don't know why they did that, but they did do it, and it's their design, so whatever. Makes it a little complicated, makes it simpler, depending on how you look at it. Here's your gasket, which I'm going to throw away. Going to pull your ignition coil wire out. Put that aside. And this wire I don't actually need to remove. I mean, you can, but you don't need to remove it. What we do need to do now is get rid of the seals. Let's clean this up a little bit. We'll get rid of the seals and the bearings. And then it's my responsibility to go clean the rest of this up. And I will get back to you when I have new parts and I can put this all back together. That's the plan. A low bench with a chair for me. Yeah, good, Bob. I don't know. You know, I've done this for years now. It seems to work for me. Don't ask me why. It just does. Do I need anything else here? A lot of this stuff, no. I can just put all this away. So if you guys notice, I basically have a triangle here to work. All of my tools are right here behind me. Let's see. Can you see my hand? Yeah. Okay. So my tools are right here behind me in this stack. And I've got my workbench over here on the side, which I never seem to work on. But I always seem to work here. But it allows me to go all kinds of places here and just have stuff pretty convenient. Now, what I've kind of figured out is that I don't want to pull these bearings out hot. It's really easy to pull them out and in cold, so that's what I'm going to do. So seals first. Actually, you know, let's get rid of some of this yucky stuff here. Let's put a go. So for this, you get a screwdriver in here. You just crack this out. It's easy, huh? These seals are plastic, so they do break, and if you got to dig them out, you got to dig them out. Do not scratch the magnesium housing by digging in too far. Good. That's it. Seals are out. Now we just need they come up with a puller here. Great. Don't worry, I got one. So I actually have my seal driver. And if anybody's interested in the seal driver, I know where more can be made. But I have my seal driver. It happens to be out in the shed right now. Not very useful out in the shed. But it's out there, and I will be using it. I'll show you guys how I do that when we put this whole thing back together. Now I need, let's see, 5/16. So now all we need is, well, let's get rid of the mallet. We don't need that anymore. How about a 3/8 socket? Nothing too big, I don't think. Small 3/8 socket fits right there. Good. So now we actually put the case halves temporarily back together. Gonna get a bunch of washers here. Actually, let's see. There we go. See, I mean, you can make all kinds of adapters and things. Just use a bunch of washers and sockets and a 5/16 nut. So you see how I got that? I'm basically using this apparatus to pull the bearing into the center here. Does anybody have any questions on this setup before I actually go for it? So we'll just crank this down and see what happens. Got to make sure your socket's on center there. Okay, anybody see that? The bearing's just getting pulled. Boom. There's your bearing. That's one. Now these bearings might be fine. Everybody know that right now. They might be fine. But they're also like 20 years old. So you really don't need to be risking it, you know? So same thing on the other side. A bigger washer. Bearing race. That'll do. Yeah, so if you want to heat this up and just slap these bearings out, you can't do it. I've tried. Those little balls, or actually little, not balls, they're rollers, fly everywhere. So don't do that. Just pull them cold. Make sure this is lined up. Bearings coming. That's it. On 09 to 090. Got a 200T that needs new crank bearings, at least on the PTO side. On the power takeoff, the clutch side. Well, you know, if you're going to go in here, what's the point in doing just one? I don't see it. And you also got to make sure with, if it needs new bearings, hopefully it doesn't need a new crank too, because if the cranks the diameter of the crank is no good, then if it's too worn down or whatever, actually what I can do right now for you is measure the crank that I have here, and we'll get a measurement, and then we can eventually compare it to other cranks. So let's do that just for giggles. Get out the micrometer and see where this is at. So you figure out if something has too much wear or not, you know. 425 and 23, so 448. Oh. 473. 425, 450, and 23. 473. That's on that side. $473 on this side, maybe a couple 10,000s off there. So on both sides, 473. So if it's that far, if it's far off of that, the crank is then messed up and you need a new crank. Nice. So yeah, now you have a measurement to go off of. And if yours is a whole lot bigger, then I need a new crank. Okay. I gotta get this back apart. Great. I'm never getting that apart again. Yeah, it's coming. It's one of the things, those things where you're just guaranteed to hurt yourself. Brian and Ryan, close your eyes. Nope, that won't fit. Never mind. Need something that's wide enough to pop it apart. But my fingers. Ah, there we go. Okay. Okay. So now I can clean all these surfaces, get this all cleaned up. Bearings are out. Just need to go order the new parts, and then we can put it all back together. If bearings are bad, won't piston and rod needs bearings too? Piston and rod bearings need to go too. Not necessarily. So the piston pin bearing, which is inside the piston there. Actually, we can take that apart too while we're at it. It's pretty rare, especially on 200Ts, that the big con rod bearing goes bad. So you certainly can change it out, but that's not really where the majority of the wear is. It's on the main bearings where the most of the stress is. And this bearing is robust, so I would not change that out. And I don't know how to change out a big end bearing. So, yeah, as long as there really isn't any vertical play, little side to side is okay, but up and down, as long as there's no up and down play, you're good. The pin bearing, usually, if it's OEM, isn't a problem either. I would reuse it. You can replace it. They are not cheap. I think the bearing that goes in the clutch is like $10. I think the piston pin bearing is $30. So if you want to do a full refresh, then that's fine, but I don't typically see much use for changing those out. If it's OEM. If it's aftermarket, I would put an OEM one in. Because a piston pin bearing is not something that you want to have going on you. That will wreck everything. And I just don't trust the aftermarket ones. My pokey thing here. So you get your, this is an all. Just trying to get the circlip out here. And this is now bent. So you do not trust this ever again. Goodbye. These are hard to do. They just are. So piston pin comes out. You only need to remove one circlip in order to get the wrist pin out. Most of the time. Pliers. There we go. That's cute, isn't it? Wrist pins out. You can reuse those. Here's the pin bearing. Man, that's tiny. But it's fine. As long as you get all the... Leave it. It's OEM. It's fine. The piston, although it looks good, a little bit of wear, I would definitely say, because the compression is a little low, let's get fresh and new. So I'm going to toss... You know what? I'll keep this around. I'll put the word old on it. Will I be buying OEM parts? Yes. For at least most of this, yes. So, Brian and Ryan were pretty specific when they were like, yep, just do it right. Okay, so we'll do it. I'm going to, now I got to figure out what parts to buy. Anybody knows what this thing is? I mean, this is interesting to me. I've never seen this part on a 200T before. So I'm going to see if I can figure out what that is. Piston. Okay. Let's see, what do we need here? Fuel line and filter, new bearings, a gasket set, probably a new carburetor, a little foam piece that we're missing, the clutch shroud, which I have to check and see if I have aftermarket, was missing a couple of bolts, starter cover, speed screw, there was a screw on the starter cover was missing, the front AV mount, I think the others are okay. Let's see here. Yeah. Check the tank. Yeah. So the other AV mounts are okay. And a piston. I think when we have that, we can put the whole thing back together and have something that's reasonable. So hopefully I can get a total on the price there and see where it ends up. But that's not going to be cheap. Wow, 13 people watching right now. Okay, so I think that's about it for the 200T. Is there anything else that you guys want to see or questions? Anything that you guys have questions about? Be happy to chat with you for a few minutes here, and then I gotta go buy these parts. Okay, 2 questions. When's the rebuild, and is it normal for a 200T to start smoking from the pull start? That's a little weird. To answer the first question, when's the rebuild? I don't know yet because I don't have the parts. If they have everything in stock, which I doubt, then I'll do it probably later this week or this weekend. If I got to order things, I don't know when it's going to be. It might be either this weekend or next week sometime that I'll do the rebuild. Welcome, Bob. To Andreas, is it normal to start smoking? Probably not. I would take that apart, at least take the starter cover off and see if there's any rub spots or wear spots in there. Why would it start smoking from that area? You may have a hole in the muffler. Who knows? And it's, the exhaust is coming out that direction. It would all be weird, but if you have a saw that's been thrown around, then just about anything's possible. Other questions? Oh, the high idle on the 660. Well, so hang on, I'll get to that. Because of the heat. Well, it might be, Andreas, it might be because of the heat, but remember on the pull start cover, that's where the air comes in from the rushes in across the flywheel and then goes to the rest of the saw and cools the rest of the saw. So that area has quite a bit of airflow coming through it. So if you have smoke coming out of it, you just pull it apart, man, and see what's up there, Okay, so the Chinese 660 and the high idle issue. The long story short on that is that Walt was right. I did take video as I was trying to fix it, trying to fiddle with it. There is, on the main multifunction elaborate piece, there's a part that actually touches the throttle, the trigger. And that part that sticks out on the OEM is actually like 10,000ths of an inch longer. And so what I did was I swapped out just that multifunction plastic part, and it worked sort of. It was not reliable, but it definitely worked with the high idle, sort of. So what I then did was I swapped out the trigger, and then it worked perfectly. The only difference that I can see on the trigger that's visible is that the trigger itself is molded in 2 pieces. And this is really hard to conceptualize, but there is the trigger itself looks like a rub surface, right? And on it's molded from 2 pieces, therefore there's a seam, okay? On that wear part, on the wear surface, there's a seam. And on the aftermarket part, on both parts, the seam is uneven on either side. So imagine, this is an exaggeration, but imagine there's a seam down the middle, and my hand represents an unevenness. So on the aftermarket part, the part that is high is thin. On the OEM part, the part that is slightly high is more thick. And I'm wondering if that difference might be only a few thousandths of an inch, does actually make a significant difference so that it actually grabs better. Andreas, get it bored first. Yeah, you do that, buddy. Okay. Big Giant Head High Idle is now a new Farmer Tech carb. It works with a crappy switch shaft. They engineered a workaround? Well, that's very interesting. If you got a video or a link, please post it. Love to see it. I spent a significant amount of time trying to figure out exactly what the issue was, where the aftermarket parts really go wrong, and it might just be that they are molded a few thousandths of an inch different than the OEM pieces, and that's the majority of the difference right there. And it's a pain in the neck to take it apart and put it back together, take it apart and put it back together, and just keep testing things. So I don't know what else to say on that other than, at least for now, it's certainly easiest just to go buy the original parts. I think I find that easiest. It's not going to be a solution for everybody, but at least for me, it was probably the easiest thing to do. Thanks, Andreas. Everybody likes my setup. That's great. I know. I catch never-ending hell for this. From everybody. Okay. What else do I have around here? Anything? There's really nothing cool around here. I've got a 385 that I just rebuilt. A 372 that I just rebuilt. Those are both for Seth. Still waiting on you, buddy. And nothing much else going right now. I have a 394 that I eventually have to rebuild. I have Sean Carr. That's actually welding cases for me. And so Sean looked like he did a really nice job. So I'm anticipating the arrival of those cases one of these days. So eventually we'll do another 394 build. I have saved all the crappiest parts for a 394 that'll probably be for milling. And I saved all the junkiest stuff. It just looks terrible. So I'm going to put together a saw that hopefully is nice and solid but looks awful. Yeah, I think the high idle issue is a distance thing, because it really looks like the two OEM parts just bind better as they meet. They bind. The whole idea is that trigger has to be held down. It cannot slip back up, so it has to bind with that multifunction part. And when it binds, it's good. But if you have it slippy slidey, then it's just going to slide back to idle as opposed to high idle. So yeah, I don't know what to tell you about that, but yeah, there's been hours spent on that, and it probably is easiest emotionally just to go and get the original parts. Although it's definitely not, it would be so incredibly satisfying to figure it out with the aftermarket parts and figure out a workaround. Believe me, I actually tried to add plastic to the tip of that multifunction part to see if I could get it to bind better. I think with a little bit more fiddling, I could probably get it. Is it worth it? No. Ten people here on the on live. You added plastic too. That's awesome. Yeah, with my my soldering iron, it does stick. It works, but maybe you got to make an indent there or something. I don't know. Gerbit, hello. You missed everything. What's the high idle anyway? So, Andreas, the problem is on the Chinese version of the MS660. It doesn't. The steel has a bunch of funny configurations of plastic things for the trigger and for the throttle and all these rods in there and whatnot. And when you go to set the choke to start the saw, automatically the idle is set high, so the butterfly is actually open. When you switch it up one, because there's a 4-position switch, you switch it up one, technically the choke is supposed to be off, not on. Choke goes off, but the butterfly is still open a little bit, setting what's called high idle. So it's basically as if you're squeezing the trigger down halfway. That's kind of what the thing is. But what happens is the Chinese parts the way that they're configured, something about them, it just lets the trigger slip back to regular idle instead of high idle, and it's not as easy to start. Yeah, Jermit, you have to go back and watch me tear apart a 200, and I got, here's the crank. You can go back and watch me tear apart a 200 if you want. Hopefully I'll get the rebuild soon. You just never know when I'm going to get the parts. So I'm going to go out to the store right now, to the steel dealer, get the parts, get them ordered, and get that underway. You broke the upper safety trigger on the 346. Do you need a whole new handle? I don't know. I've thought about it. Actually, if you need one, I have one. I have a 350 handle sitting around. But I guess I could fiddle with that. No, it doesn't. It doesn't split. What I would imagine would be that you have to pull the trigger out and then see if you can actually, because I think the trigger you can get out. I've replaced those before. No, it has to come out. It has to come out. You want me to go get it? I'll go get it, and because I have one. It's out in the shed. You want me to go get it? Well, I'll do a teardown right now. It'll only take 10 minutes. You want to do that? All right, I'll go out to the shed real quick. I'll be right back. Give me 3 minutes. Man, it is a gorgeous day outside, guys. Here it is. Well, let's play. I noticed my workbench is still dirty. You guys are slacking. Now let's see. I abuse my little Allens here from Harbor Freight. Use them as punches. Okay. Intermission's over. Lights, camera, get back to it. So it looks like there's a pin here. 3mm pin, 26mm long. Okay, so this just wiggles right out once the pin's gone. They had to make this complicated, didn't they? That's quite this funky setup. Ah, check that out. So this piece, there's actually two grabby things right here. Now the question is, how the devil do I get this back in? Because it sure looks like instead of going in there, it's got to go in there. Okay. So let's see if we can get this back in. It's one of the grabby things that snapped. Yeah, well, once you get this out, then just get a new part. Let's see, can I get this back in there? Oh yeah. So there's actually, these two round things do sort of click in. So watch. Click. And then down. Does that help? Never try to fix a running system. Alright, how the devil... I got it out once. Let's see if I can... I just wiggle that back and forth and then out. And that came out. Because this does flex. And actually this flexes quite a bit. Click forward. And down. Can you show how the spring goes on the trigger? Okay. So it looks to me, and if we need, let's see, do we need more light? Light. Confused here. It looks like this. There's a grabby piece that goes into that triangle area. Does that help? And then the spring in there. And then that's the angle there. Does that help you? Here, let's see if I can get this back in. I know. Not possible. Oh, you know what? You know what would be better at this point? Now I know how to get this out. I'm willing to bet putting the trigger in first, if you're putting this back together, is going to be the ticket. Click. Okay. So again, the round things on the trigger you have to get seated. Tap in your pin. I think this spring has got to be in the back area here. Let's try this maybe. Maybe hold the spring down. Click this in the front. Click. Release the spring into the back area and click that down. How's that work for you? Andreas, take care. Thanks for the comments. Jirbit, you're very welcome. I know, these things are definitely something that are kind of a pain in the neck. They're the bane of everybody's existence. You know, once you pull something like that apart, what happens is that you get into this state of mind, you go, oh God, this is never going back together. And I've been there 1,000 times because you're utterly convinced that you're just not ever going to get it back together. It's the worst. I've had that on the Volvo, pulling that PCV system apart. There were so many pieces. I literally had to write down every step, and then I had to reverse them all. Other questions, comments, anything, guys? All right, I'm going to go buy some parts. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go buy some parts. We'll see you later. I don't know when the rebuild's going to be, but everybody keep posted. I'll hopefully... I just never know when I'm going to have a free second to do it. So I'm sorry that there's no planning here, but this is what it is, and hopefully I haven't disturbed too many people's work days. Especially you, Andy. All right, you guys take care. Big thumbs up for everybody. And we'll see you soon. Bye.